and welcome to the Pathfinder Lair. My name is Drew and I've been a game master for over 10 years. On this channel, I help new players understand the rules of the Pathfinder 2nd Edition system. Today in the Lair, I will be covering the heritages and feats for the Dwarf and Elf ancestries in the Lost Omens character guide. Sorry for not including these in my previous Ancestry album videos, but I'm covering them now. Let's start with the Dwarf. First, there has been a change in the basics of dwarves in the core rulebook. Now every dwarf gets a clan dagger for free. Selling this dagger is taboo for dwarves, and other dwarves won't like you very much if you do so. For heritages, we have the Anvil Dwarf. This heritage gives you trained proficiency in the crafting skill. And of course, if you're already trained in crafting, you get a different skill from this heritage. You gain the specialty crafting feat, but you get to pick 2 specialties instead of 1. This heritage is very good, especially if you want to be the crafter type dwarf. Getting a skill and a better version of a skill feat to go with it is always going to be good. Next is the Elemental Heart Dwarf. When you take this heritage, you choose an energy type and gain the Energy Emanation activity. Once per day for 2 actions, you can unleash a burst of the energy type you chose to all adjacent creatures. This deals 1d6 damage at first level, and the damage increases by 1d6 at 3rd level and every 2 levels after that. You don't even need to be a spellcaster to gain this activity. This heritage is probably one of the better dwarf heritage. Imagine you're a fighter and you get surrounded by enemies. Just being able to unleash a 5-foot burst of energy to all creatures around you would be fantastic in that situation. They do get a reflex save against your class DC or your spell DC, whichever is higher, to resist the effect. So if they get a critical success, they take nothing, but it's still a good heritage. Definitely consider this heritage if you are playing a dwarf. Lastly, for heritages for the dwarf, we have the Oathkeeper Dwarf. Pretty much what this heritage does is make you very good at convincing people you are telling the truth and knowing when someone is lying to you, but very bad at lying yourself. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus to perception checks to sense motive and to perception DCs against attempts to lie to you. You also receive a +2 circumstance bonus to diplomacy checks to convince others that you are telling the truth when you are doing so. But you take a -4 circumstance penalty on checks to lie and your deception DC against sense motive. Great roleplay heritage. If you want to be that honorable dwarf who never lies, take this heritage. Otherwise, you might want to take a different heritage. Now let's talk about ancestry feats, starting with the first level ones. Avenging Glory is a feat that requires a certain ethnicity to access. It does not require this ethnicity to take the feat, but your GM may require you to be this ethnicity to gain access to it. If this is the case and you are a dwarf from the mountains, you have access to this feat. I probably won't go over the ethnicities that are required to access other feats in this book, because then I would have to go over all the ethnicities with you guys, and there are far too many in this book. If you want me to do that, let me know in the comments or on the Pathfinder Lair Facebook group. This feat gives you a once per day reaction with the trigger. An ally within 30 feet gains the dying condition. You gain temporary hit points equal to your level for 1 minute. As long as you have these temporary hit points, you also gain a +1 circumstance bonus to attack and damage rolls. This feat isn't that good. Your allies aren't going to go down very often, so you won't gain the benefits of this feat very often either. Next we have Clan's Edge. This feat requires you to be trained in clan daggers. This is normally achieved through the Dwarven Weapon Familiarity feat, which I cover in my Dwarf's Ancestry album video. Check that out in the card. For 2 actions, you make 2 strikes against different creatures, and then you can activate the parry trait of your clan dagger for free, which gives you a +1 to your AC. Your multiple attack penalty does apply normally to these strikes. If you actually want to use your clan dagger, instead of just keeping it on your person, take this feat. Otherwise, take something else. Third for first level feats is Forged Day's Rest. As long as you take 12 hours to rest instead of the normal 8, you gain the benefits of the fast recovery general feat. And you can go 20 hours without resting before you become fatigued. The problem with this feat is that unless your group is a bunch of dwarves who all have this feat, you probably won't be able to rest for 12 hours very often. It has great benefits, but too much of a requirement to be very good. Lastly, for first level ancestry feats in this book, we have the surface culture feats. To gain access to this feat, you need to be a dwarf that lives on the surface, rather than underground or in the mountains. This feat gives you trained proficiency in the society skill and the additional lore skill feats. However, the additional lore skill that you get from the additional lore skill feat must be the lore skill that is associated with your culture, such as Palmet lore. Getting a skill and a skill feat to go with it is always good. It sucks that the lore has to be a specific one, but this is still a good feat. Now let's move on to 5th level ancestry feats for the dwarf. Clan Protector allows you to use your clan dagger to protect not only yourself, but also your allies. Whenever you use the interact action to gain the AC bonus from your clan dagger's parry trait, you can grant that bonus to an ally rather than yourself. You can use a bunch of interact actions to give this bonus to more than one ally as well as yourself. You must be adjacent to the allies this feat applies to use this feat. This feat isn't that good, but if you want to give your allies a bit of protection, take this feat. Otherwise, take something else. Next we have Protective Sheath. This feat requires the Clan's Edge feat, which I covered earlier in this video. This feat basically lets you use your clan dagger's sheath as an impromptu shield, as long as you are not holding anything else in that hand, and you have a clan dagger in your other hand. Your AC bonus from parrying increases to +2 against any target you hit with a strike this turn. This feat is really good. Makes parrying with your clan dagger even better. Plus, it's a really cool feat as well. Here, let me use my sheath as a freaking shield. Definitely consider this feat at 5th level. Lastly, for 5th level ancestry feats in this book, I want to cover the Tomb Watcher's Glare feat. This feat requires the Death Warden Dwarf Heritage, which I cover in my other Dwarfs video. Whenever you quickly hit an undead, or if an undead crit fails a saving throw against one of your abilities, that creature becomes enfeebled 1. This feat is situational. Depends on how much undead you run into. There are a lot of games featuring a lot of undead, but whether this feat is good or not will depend on your game. Let's cover the 9th level ancestry feats for the dwarf in this book, and then we will move on to elves. The first 9th level feat is Battle Forged. You must be a master in crafting to take this feat. This feat allows you to temporarily make any weapon or armor that doesn't already have a potency rune, like a +1, gain a +1 potency rune until the next time you prepare for the adventuring day. This feat isn't very good. By the time you reach 9th level, you'll probably have quite a few +1 weapons, and probably a weapon with the striking property as well. You will also probably already have a set of +1 armor. I would not recommend taking this feat. Next we have Energy Blast. This feat requires the Elemental Heart Dwarf Heritage to take. When you use your Energy Emanation ability, you can make it a 5-foot, 10-foot, or 15-foot burst instead of just a 5-foot burst. In addition, the damage increases to 66, and the damage increases by 1d6 every level past 9th, instead of every 2 levels past 1st. This feat is very good. It is just a better version of the Elemental Heart Dwarf Heritage, and that heritage was already really good. Third is Hero's Call. This feat gives you heroism once per day as a 3rd level innate occult spell. Also, if you happen to cast it while you have half or less hit points left, you get double your level hit points back. Very good feat. Heroism is a great spell, and as I have said many times before, any feat that gives you an innate spell will always be good. Lastly, for Dwarf feats, we have the Kneel for No God 9th level Ancestry feat. This feat requires the Ancient Blooded Dwarf heritage to take. When you use your Call on Ancient Blood reaction against a Divine spell and get a critical failure on the saving throw, you actually only get a regular failure. This feat is only good if you're running into a lot of Divine spells. If you are, take this feat. Otherwise, take something else. Now we can move on to what I have for elves in this video. Let's start with heritages. First up, we have the Ancient Elf. This heritage is one word: broken. This heritage just straight up gives you a multi-class archetype dedication feat at first level, even though you normally have to be level 2 to take dedication feats. You still have to meet all the other prerequisites though. Getting a multi-class archetype feat before anyone else can is fantastic. Take this heritage if you want a multi-class. Lastly for heritages is the Desert Elf. This heritage is identical to the Arctic Elf heritage, except it applies to fire damage and elemental heat effects. Just like Arctic Elf, it's pretty situational. Depends on how many of these effects you run into. Although it's a little better than Arctic Elf simply because fire damage is a lot more common than cold damage. Now let's talk about ancestry feats for the elf, starting with first level. Elemental Wrath gives you the Acid Splash cantrip as an innate primal spell, except you get to choose what type of damage it does, and it only has verbal components. This spell is heightened as normal for cantrips. This feat is really good. It's Acid Splash, but you get to choose what type of damage it does. Next is Elven Verve. This feat gives you a +1 circumstance bonus on saves against any effect that would cause the immobilized, paralyzed, or slowed condition. In addition, anytime you gain one of these conditions for at least 2 rounds, reduce the duration by 1 round. This feat isn't great at low levels, but it is good at high levels when you can run into this sort of thing more often. Third is Share Thoughts. This is a feat that has a prerequisite of a certain ethnicity, but this one gives you a choice between 3 different ones. Yes, a prerequisite. You have to be one of these ethnicities to take this feat. You cannot be any other ethnicity. It's not an access thing like most of the feats in this video. This feat gives you Mind Link as an innate occult spell once per day, but you can only use it on other elves or half-elves. This feat would be completely insane if you could target anyone. It certainly wouldn't be a first-level feat. If your group is playing nothing but elves and half-elves, consider this feat. You might also consider this feat if you want the completely broken feat I will go over when I get to the 9th level feats as well. Otherwise, take something else. Wildborn Magic just gives you any primal cantrip as an innate primal spell at will. It is heightened just like all cantrips are. Like I said for otherworldly magic, this feat is really good. Getting any primal cantrip, even if you aren't a spellcaster, is great. Definitely consider this feat at first level. If you would like to know more about otherworldly magic, check out my elf video in the card. Lastly, for first level ancestry feats, there is Woodcraft. Whenever you get a critical failure on a survival check to sense motive, subsist, or cover your tracks in a forest or jungle area, you instead actually get a regular failure. In addition, if you get a success on these checks, you get a critical success instead. So basically, either regularly fail or you crit succeed on these checks. This feat would be ridiculous if you could use it anywhere, but since you can't, it isn't that good. You are more likely to be in caves or underground than you are to be in a forest or jungle. Now let's talk about 5th level feats for the elf, starting with Defiance Unto Death. If you would start your turn with the confused, controlled, or fleeing condition because you failed an earlier will save, you can make another will save at the same DC. If you succeed, you become paralyzed until your next turn rather than act against your will. This feat is really good late game when you are more likely to run into these kind of effects. Plus, it is really cool just to be able to say, no, I will not do this, just out of sheer willpower. Next is Elven Instincts. This feat gives you a +2 bonus on perception checks made as initiative rolls. Also, if your initiative is tied with an opponent, you always go first, no matter what you rolled for initiative. This feat is okay. Getting a +2 to initiative is alright. The tying thing is okay too. If you want to go first on a tie, take this feat. Otherwise, take something else. Forest Stealth requires you to be an expert in the stealth skill to take. This feat allows you to take cover and then use that cover to hide, all for one action. However, you must be in a forested environment and be able to use the take cover action normally. This feat is situational. Depends on how many forested areas you run into. But like I said before, caves and underground areas are much more common. Lastly, for 5th level feats, we have the Wildborn Adept feat. It requires the Wildborn Magic feat to take. This feat gives you 3 specific primal spells as innate primal spells at will. They are Dancing Lights, Disrupt Undead, and Tanglefoot. That's it. There isn't much to this feat. It just gives you 3 primal cantrips. Time for 9th level feats, starting with Brightness Seeker. Once per day, you can spend 10 minutes reflecting on your environment to cast the Augury spell as an innate divine spell. With the Augury spell, you can ask a specific question. What will happen if I insert specific course of action here? You can get 4 different answers to this question. Wheel, something good will happen. Woe, something bad will happen. Wheel and woe, something good and something bad will happen. Or nothing. When you cast this spell, if the result is anything but nothing, you gain the following reaction. Call upon Brightness. Trigger. You attempt an attack roll, skill check, or saving throw while performing the course of action you asked when you cast Augury. Effect. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus on the triggering check, or a +2 if the result was woe and you proceeded anyway. This feat is really good. Being able to cast Augury without needing to be a spellcaster is great. Lastly, for 9th level feats, I will talk about the feat I mentioned earlier. It is called Sense Thoughts. This feat requires the Share Thoughts Ancestry feat to take. This feat gives you mind reading as an innate occult spell once per day. And yes, it is as broken as it sounds. Being able to read someone's mind once per day is, well, fantastic. Now let's talk about the last elf feat in the Lost Omens character guide, the 13th level feat, Wandering Hearts. This feat requires one of the environmental elf heritages, like Arctic Elf or Cavern Elf. After you spend a week in an environment that is associated with an elf heritage, you lose your current heritage and gain that heritage. For example, if you are a Cavern Elf and you spend a week in a cold environment, then you would lose dark vision and gain resistance to cold. This feat can be really good if you are spending a lot of time in an environment that applies to this feat. If you are spending a lot of time in one of these environments and then moving on to a different environment that this feat applies to a lot, consider this feat. Otherwise, take something else. And that's going to wrap up this video. If this video helped you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more Pathfinder 2nd Edition tutorial videos. If you are already subscribed, don't forget to hit that sub-notification bell to be alerted to new episodes. Later this week I will be doing another of these videos, this time on the Gnome and Goblin heritages. Next week I will be continuing my Ancestry album series with the Catfolk and Kobold ancestries. So until next time, let's play some Pathfinder. 1, 2, 3.